What's crappin'? Welcome to Under the Foreskin, a show dedicated to the happenings of the SJU and Misfits Fantasy Football League. My name is Kyle. I'm the head of football operations for the defending champion Potomac Pretenders, 2014 SJU and Misfits Fantasy Football Champions. Feels great. Thank you. Hold the applause. Also with me in studio today, Tyler Olson, Chief Operating Officer of the Poughkeepsie Pandas, the other PP in the league. Didn't have the season he hoped for last year, just devastated by injuries all season, but looking for a bounce-back year after a nice draft this year. So we're in week 2 of the preseason. We just had our 14-team auction. 12 of the 14 owners were there. There were 2 stand-ins, which they did a nice, mighty fine job. Other than that, we're going to break down all the teams from this year, how the draft went. We're going to talk about 3 make players and 3 break players. And then Tyler and I are going to give you our thoughts, I know you care, on who's going to finish top 3 and who's going to finish bottom 3. So with that, let's start with the Hollywood Hotties up first. Tyler, I'm going to let you take the Hotties right away since the Pandas are the second team, and I don't think it's right that you talk about your own team.
All right, gentlemen. Hotties came in with a very lauded group of keepers in Stacy, Lacey, and Harvin. Takes up Demarius in the draft for upper 60s auction dollars. Gets Jordan Reed as well, Stephen Ridley as the flex. Have the makings of a great team. I don't know about Russell Wilson as a fantasy quarterback, but having Dalton as a backup, he's known to sling those numbers up. The real make or break for this squad is Percy. If he stays healthy, the team could just be very dynamic, lots of points. Lots of number 1 wide receivers, number 1 running backs, number 1 tight ends on the squad, especially if Ridley can handle his fumbling woes and stay in for those goal line carries. This could be a team to reckon with.
Very good. I like the Hotties a lot too. I think a couple question marks on there, not a lot of depth on the team, but if Percy and everybody else stays healthy, I think they have a good shot at making a run at it. They'd be the first repeat champion in the 5th year of the SJU Misfits Fantasy Football. Next up, Poughkeepsie Pandas, Tyler's team. Keepers this year are Dougie Martin, teach me how to Dougie, CJ Spiller, and T.Y. Hilton. First things first, the Pandas went out and got the best wide receiver in the league, Kelvin Johnson. They also paid upper 60s, actually the same as Demarius, $69. And on the bench, they grabbed guys like Cooks and Evans, Cooks for New Orleans and Evans for Tampa Bay. 2 nice players with a lot of upside. They also grab Eric Decker, new home in New York, in the green side of New York, the Jets. He does have either Michael Vick or Geno Smith throwing the ball, so it'll be interesting to see how Decker does. You gotta like what he did in Denver, but it's a whole different human being throwing him the ball in Peyton Manning. But we'll see. Got a nice value on Vernon Davis, like that a lot. Also has Cecil Shorts hanging out and pretty much has the backfields locked up for both Tampa Bay with Sims and also Buffalo with Freddie Jackson and Bryce Brown. So really covered his bases this year. He got burned pretty hard watching Fred Jackson score touchdowns last year while CJ Spiller sat on the pine with a slightly sprained ankle. I like the Poughkeepsie Pandas a lot this year. I think Martin and Spiller are kind of their big swing players. If they have bounce-back years and become the top 10 running backs they once were and we think could be, I think the Pandas are a force to be reckoned with. Tony Romo at the helm. I love Romo, so I think it's a nice quarterback for him. Any thoughts on your team there, Tyler?
Better than last year? Question mark? Your thoughts?
I agree. Definitely.
Yeah. Next up, we got the Armadillos from Buffalo. Came back keeping Kaepernick, Julio Jones, and Senior Julius Thomas. 3 solid players. Kaepernick hopefully to put some more points up for him and increase that passing yardage and passing touchdowns this year. Paid a price for Le'Veon Bell at upper 60s as well.
69.
Also grabbed Bishop Shanky, so he's got a very young backfield. But if they produce like supposedly they can or will, pretty solid team. The one big question is who he will start in flex between Stills, Stevie Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, That's a huge question mark for him, and he's really got to hope for the numbers out of the rest of his squad to make up for that flex player.
Also like the Buffalo Armadillos, a little thin on the bench, but as we've seen kind of this whole way this year, everyone's a little thin on the bench. It's going to be interesting to see who pops this year and who does actually make or break a team. But there's a lot of parity in the league this year, a lot more than there was last year. I think keeper values are getting a little more what they should be. There's not as many crazy steals out there, and I think that makes a big difference. So the Flint Tropics up next. One team with only 2 keepers this year, and Des Bryant for $24, obviously a nice value. And then Matthew Stafford for $16. I think most players in the league would take Stafford for $16. The big spend for the Flint Tropics was Deshaun Jackson at $26 and Ryan Matthews at $33. Dinger, definitely just looking at his values, went for kind of a more balanced approach. And after years and years of not having any running backs, he drafted a lot of running backs. I'm still not sure he has any running backs, but he sure drafted a lot. Ryan Matthews, Bernard Pierce, Darren McFadden, Steven Jackson, Jerick McKinnon, Devonta Freeman, Marcus Lattimore, and Mark Ingram. There's a lot of running backs on that team. Be interesting to see if any or how many of them pan out. For the Tropics, I think his swing players are Ryan Matthews and Bernard Pierce. If Bernard Pierce takes the job from Ray Rice in those first 2 weeks and keeps running with it, could be a pretty solid-looking team. You're going to have a little make and break with Deshaun, but Dez should be great. And Andre, you don't know who's going to be throwing him the ball. Who is it, Fitzpatrick?
Who's he at?
Who's Houston's quarterback?
Yeah, he's got the Fitz.
Oh, I think Andre Johnson could have a career year. I like the Flint Tropics a little more. But overall, pretty even keel team. A lot of running backs. Be interested to see how it turns out.
Yeah, and again with Dinger, he's got solid receivers, but besides, I believe he's got Riley Cooper as his 4th receiver, and that's it. And among running backs, he really needs injuries for some of his guys to the cream to rise to the top for him to utilize those backup players he picked up in the auction. Next up, we got the Wrinkle Beast of Waco. I believe they kept Cameron Newton, Monty Ball, maybe someone else, doesn't matter. Kendall Wright. They picked up Antonio Brown in the auction for $65, something like that, which is a huge price to pay. Although he did have a career year last year. Really betting the house on Monty Ball and Chris Johnson for his running backs, making a difference. That makes me very hesitant about his team. Terrence Williams as his flex is a good sleeper. We hear a lot of good things about him, and especially with how crappy the Dallas defense is, they will be hucking the pigskin around. So, the bench is, it's thin. Who knows what Moreno's going to do in Miami, if he'll start or if he'll be the number 2. Wide receivers got Amendola and Nix in Indy, but with T.Y. Hilton and Reggie Wayne both in Indy in front of Nix, I don't know how that pickup will play out.
Yeah, Waco I think has a solid-looking team. A lot of question marks, like a lot of us have, but there's some potential there, I believe, for a solid team. We'll see. That's all you can really say here is we'll see. Next up, one of my favorite teams, Baton Rouge Border Collies. He took a little page out of the Potomac Pretenders book this year and drafted a lot of ex-pretenders, which, I like that strategy. I hope it works out well for you. He started the year with Matt Forte and Nick Foles. Forte for 38 and Foles for 6. So pretty squared up in those 2 positions, you would think. His big spends, he also kind of inherited the even keel spending. No monster spends. He put down 30 on Cruz, 30 on Torrey Smith, 28 on Larry Fitzgerald. So kind of gave himself a nice 1-2-3 punch there. After that, he's got some question marks at wide receiver, as one can expect on the bench. He also got Maurice Jones-Drew, which I think is kind of the swing player for him this year. Maurice bounces back this year in Oakland and has himself a mighty fine season. The Border Collies could be one dog with a mighty bite. But if Maurice Jones-Drew just gives carries to McFadden and whoever else is in there, might struggle in that running back 2 position. Next up, we got the Tallahassee Trouser Snakes, the most active team in the league.
as usual, Dave, on his big money spends early in the auction and then dollar players thereafter, picks up, gets Mike Wallace, ends up trading for Frank Gore, Drew Brees, Dennis Pitta. Might even trade for Sproles too, or unless he auctioned for him. But
traded.
You know, you can't feel that bad when you got Brees and Jamal as your top QB and your top running back. Although he is extremely thin everywhere else. I mean, he needs Macklin to stay healthy and produce in Philly this year. He needs Gore to not get supplanted by Carlos Hyde. He needs Pitta, so he needs Flacco to huck some pigskins at him, as well as his flex is a big question mark having Sproles. At best after that he's got, Bradshaw could turn out well. That's a pickup from today, a trade with the Smugglers, with what's his name?
Jordan Cameron for Bradshaw.
Vic Ballard, I think, going down, or whoever it was with that Torrey ACL.
Yep, and then
we all know T-Rich is junk, so Matt Bradshaw could become the number one very easy there as long as he stays healthy. He's known to have those injury problems as well. Picked up Gates on the waiver wire today for $25.
Probably could have got him for one.
And he's running the no defense, no kicker set, so we'll see how that plays out. Interesting year for the Trouser Snakes.
Always interesting with the Trouser Snakes. Next up, the Butte Pirates, second place finishers from last year. Initially, he kept DeMarco Murray, Cordell Patterson, Ben Tate. Those three are all still on his team. But he did, his number one person he acquired was Drew Brees. Spent a nice chunk of change, 50-something on him. But then worked out a deal with the Trouser Snakes for Brandon Marshall. In the end, Brandon Marshall ended up his team, and that's his number one wide receiver. Outside of Brandon Marshall, you got guys like Cordarrelle Patterson, Vincent Jackson. A lot of upside with both of those guys. Vinny Jackson's a little boomer bust we've seen in the past year. Cordarrelle's definitely an emerging star. But his bench is pretty thin. James Starks is there for him if Eddie Lacy were to go down. I'm sure Zach's, although he's a Packer fan, maybe he's not cheering for Eddie Lacy, but from a fantasy perspective, he probably is, for Lacy to go down and Starks to take the rock. Not sure who a lot of these other players are on his bench, to be completely honest, so I'm not even going to talk about them. DeMarco Murray, number one running back. Ben Tate, number two running back. Tate, new setting there in Cleveland. We shall see how that works out. Tom Brady at the helm. That was part of that Drew Brees, Frank Gore for Tom Brady, Brandon Marshall. Definitely like that deal for Zach. There was probably some liquor involved on Dave's side when he made that trade. So, next up, we got the Duluth Draft Dodgers, one of the teams that was absent from the draft.
We'll just run back real quick to Zach. I mean, the big key for his team is for Tate to stay the number one running back. If he stays the number one and gets the carries, the amount of workload that we have projected he will have, I mean, he's got a pretty stout team. He needs his wide receivers to make up for having Charles Clay as the tight end, but if Tate produces, he's got some potential for a pretty solid squad. And like you said, next up we got the Draft Dodgers, who hence dodged the draft. Hondo filling in. They kept Randall Cobb, LaShawn McCoy, Alfred Morris.
Probably my favorite keepers.
Definitely an unbelievably solid set of keepers. In the auction itself, they picked up Matty Ryan,
Blake Bortles.
They got the board, and they also picked up Sammy Watkins. Zach Ertz a tight end, Richardson is a flex. Another team with a bunch of potential players that could pop out, but I think having Sammy Watkins as your number two is wide receiver wise is a big risk. Especially with E.J. Manuel trying to throw to him. I think the best thing you can hope from Sammy is 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, given how run heavy that offense is. Ertz is a big sleeper candidate tight end. We'll see how Foles does with him if they got that real connection and he treats him like the Gronk of the Philadelphia area. And next up, we got the Sioux City Smugglers.
Rogers team, they started the year with Gio Bernard for $30, AJ Green for $18, and Justin Hunter for $3. Popular sleeper. Yeah, that's a good question. Big spend this year for the Smugglers was Reggie Bush at $51. It was key for him to go ahead and get Joik Bell, which he paid $23 for. So I really see that he paid, for a Lions running back, he paid $74. I think that's the best way to look at that. It'll be interesting if both those guys work their way into the starting lineup at any point of the year. Terrence West, he paid $13 for. If Ben Tate isn't all we thought he was, Terrence West could be next in line there. $15 for Robert Griffin he paid. Griffin had a tough season last year, but a great season the year before. What's the tiebreaker here in Season 3? Going to be interesting. I think Rodgers got a solid squad. He's got Calvin Benjamin, which I've heard big things about, and a lot of nice running back depth. James White. Who else did he pick up? Like I said, Joik Bell, Terrence West. Neither of those guys are technically starters for him at the moment. So he's got some nice running back depth, a lot of potential for guys to pop. If more than one of them pops, all of a sudden he's got some good trade value to get a guy, maybe another solid wide receiver to back up A.J. Green and Michael Floyd. So nice looking team out of Sioux City. He's got to be happy with the way the draft went for him.
All right, gentlemen, next up we got the Chernobyl Tin Whiskers, the reigning High Point champion of the league. They are returning Peyton Manning, Alshon Jeffrey, and Jordy Nelson, who will definitely be the core of that squad. Running backs, Foster Vereen as the 1 and 2, Lamar Miller as a possible flex, RB3, and Travis Kelce as the tight end. Biggest thing for him is he needs Vereen to, get a lot more production than he did last year, so he's praying for an injury to Ridley. He's got Emmanuel Sanders on the bench, another Denver wide receiver, newcomer from Pittsburgh, who supposedly might take a somewhat Decker role. I don't think quite that highly, but I think he'll definitely in that offense be good for, a much better year than last year. Hopefully, 907 for him. The biggest question mark for him is tight end, Travis Kelce. Who? Yeah. But with having Peyton, Alshon, and Jordy, those players should make up the lack of depth he has at tight end. And by lack of depth, I mean no depth at tight end. But beyond that, he's got Le'Veon's backup and LeGarrette Blount in Pittsburgh. Colston in New Orleans, who is kind of, here and there off the map. You never know if he's going to put up a big game or jack shit. But he's obviously got those big high point scores that could definitely lead to him making up for the lack of depth in other places for his squad this year.
Yeah, I think in Chernobyl you gotta like Manning, Jeffrey, and Nelson. He tied his ship to Arian Foster. That was his big spend in the draft, and if Foster works out, that's going to be a scary good team. He's got a lot of potential, but if Foster doesn't work out, he does have Justin Grimes, which he picked up today in the first waiver wire Wednesday of the year. I just don't think Justin Grimes is going to fill in what Arian Foster could. So Chernobyl's praying for no disasters. Next up, my Potomac Pretenders. Do you want to talk about them, Ollie? We can combine. I got a lot of nice things to say about the Potomac Pretenders.
All right, I'll head out first. So Pretenders, reigning champs.
Yep.
They're bringing back Crabtree. They traded for Gronk and AP to bring back as keepers this year, supposedly. Traded for Jennings and Gronk at the auction from Treadle.
Tyler doesn't like that trade for me. Why don't we explain the trade? Brandon Marshall, Darren Sproles, Dennis Pitta for Rob Gronkowski, Rashad Jennings, and Steve Smith Sr.
So Steve Smith, he doesn't even count.
Right.
I don't know. I just don't like the fact he gave away Brandon Marshall. You got Gronk, but who knows? 4 surgeries in 2 years. That's a big gamble. If it pays off, that's huge for you because he'll be, him and Graham will fight out for number 1. They're both big boys. Picking up Jennings, that is huge. Ripping off that 73-yard touchdown run the preseason, running through a...
That was the night of the draft that happened.
Night of the draft, running through that hole the size of... Well, we won't go there, but... As far as the squad itself, myself, I'm leery about Crabtree, and as run-heavy as that offense is, I just... if he's... We'll call him wide receiver 2 after Pierre Garçon. I don't feel that strongly on him as you obviously do. Running backs, I'd be very happy with AP and Rashad Jennings. Luck, he hasn't been the greatest fantasy quarterback, but he keeps on getting better every year. So
I didn't spend a lot on him.
I expect him to take a step forward every year. Later in the auction, he paid what was it, $8 for Mr. Josh Gordon. That could be the big break or make for this squad. Make or break. If he comes back with only an 8-game suspension, obviously Kyle will sit on him and play him later in the year in the playoffs. Other than that, his wide, the bench is
pretty thin.
Thin with upside, I guess. You've got 2 other number 1 wide receivers in Miles Austin, James Jones in Cleveland and Oakland, respectively. Who the hell knows what they're going to do?
Yeah.
I see upside on that squad, but there's also definitely players I'm leery about at this point.
I'm not going to elaborate too much on that. I like my team. He's absolutely right on guys like Crabtree and Garcon. They're probably not number 1 receiver caliber, but I'm going to stick them out there like they are. Pretty excited about Gronk, to be honest. I think the luck's going to change. He's breaking a lot of bones, and when you think about broken bones, it's not like a soft guy going out there tweaking a hammy and being out for 4 games. This guy is snapping his leg in half. It's just terrible luck.
So that's good.
Well, I think it changes this year. And to be honest, I'd rather have a guy snap his leg and be out for the season than say he's going to play and not play the entire season, significant time. So I like the Pretenders, and it's going to be real exciting cheering for AP, not only for the Vikings' sake, but also as a Pretender, leading me to the league's first back-to-back championship. The Alaskan Pipeliners next on the board. Keepers this year. Oh, I should say this. The Alaskan Pipeliners are new to the league this year in that they moved cities. Previously, they were the Poland Sausage Wallets, and they moved back across the Atlantic to the bitter cold, the winter's coming, Alaska Pipeliners. So Seth heads up the Pipeliners, kept Aaron Rodgers, Ruben Randall, Ladarius Green. His number 1 spend this year, Keenan Allen for $36 and Andre Ellington for $49. A lot of hype on Ellington. It'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. On the bench, he's got guys, he doesn't have a lot of guys. He's got some grizzled veterans, Anquan Bolden, Dougie Baldwin, Marvin Jones. I guess, Julian Edelman's probably cracking his starting lineup. I'd say that's his number 2 receiver. And then guys like Chris Ivory are there and Ray Rice. And I really see those 2 as being the main swing players for him. If Ray Rice, can even squeak back into the top 15 or 20, it's not a bad-looking team at first glance. But if Ray Rice struggles and hands a lot of carries and touchdowns to Bernard Pierce, could be a long year for the new coming Alaskan Pipeliners.
And to go on in the Pipeliners a little bit more, the one thing makes me think of Andre Ellington is how hyped up Spiller was at the end of last year, or before our auction last year. Very similar type of players, very dynamic. Elusive is the key word, and we all saw what Spiller did last year. Granted, Andre Ellington doesn't have the aging wonder Fred Jackson behind him to steal those goal line carries. So I don't think he'll lose as many touches as Spiller did, but he very much reminds me of a very similar type of player. He's got top, I don't know if I'd say 5 upside, but he's definitely got top 10 upside. But he could also be, extremely bad if he gets bottled up and can't, break through the line. Last squad up, we got the Crapstone Prairie Dogs. Alex Dunn, returning keepers of Mr. Toby Gerhardt, Marshawn Lynch, and my boy Jimmy Graham. I think going into the year, this was my favorite squad as far as keepers went. Toby, granted it's the Jacksonville offense, but he's the unquestioned number 1 at this point. Marshawn, he had some preseason questions about what the hell was going on between him and the squad, but I don't believe he'll drop off as much as people think he will. Jimmy, obviously the number 1 player on that team, even more important than Marshawn is. Big question for him, although he's got Cutler at quarterback, loves to hug the pigskin. Very old wide receiving core and Roddy White, Reggie Wayne, and Greg Jennings. I mean, that's the key for him this year. If they produce, like they had 2-3 years ago, his team will be phenomenal.
Oh,
but if they don't, I mean, he does not have anything wide receiver-wise behind them. So that's the big question for Mr. Odunchkin this year.
All right, let's break into a little make or break players this year. And initially we tried to come up with 3 players that we thought would make teams and 3 players we thought would break teams. So the hardest part about that is a make player you would think is someone with low expectations who's going to perform great. I really think there's one player with no expectations but could perform great. Josh Gordon, my team, Potomac Pretenders. If he plays 8 games, good things could happen for the Pretenders. If he doesn't play any games, well, then I'm not really at a loss, except for that I gave up a little auction cash for next year. But he's really one of the biggest make players in the league. There weren't a lot of... Our whole league's pretty plugged in, so when you think about sleepers, there's not a lot of great value in the sleepers that went out there this year. Everyone paid... There were no dollar guys like Alfred Morris or players like at that caliber that are pretty hyped up and you think could have a good season. Everybody knows about them, so their costs went up. I do think there's a lot of players this year that people paid a lot for or have high expectations for, but could crash and burn. Number 1 for me, Arian Foster. There's a lot of question marks for Arian, and there's a guy for Chernobyl that if he crashes and burns, Chernobyl could struggle a little bit, assuming Justin Grimes isn't what Arian Foster is. You want to take the next one, Oli?
I will indeed. The guy I picked out was Percy Harvin for the Hollywood Hotties. Given his injury history, when he's on the field, the guy's a stud. But for that team, if he cannot stay healthy, they do not have a number 2 wide receiver. The best they got is Golden Tate, and after that, Marquise Lee for Jacksonville. So if Harvin goes down, that team is going to be in some trouble because Wilson isn't the biggest producer fantasy-wise at quarterback. Solid RBs, but wide receiver-wise, which is what this league is trending towards, is all about the wide receivers. He could be in some trouble if Percy does not play or does not produce.
I'm going to say the next... And this guy didn't pay a lot for, but I think he still has high expectations for, and that's Toby Gerhardt. He paid $3 for him, Crapstone Prairie Dogs. Head guy, Alex Dunn, paid $3 for Toby, and I think the expectations are pretty high for Toby in Jacksonville. But I've met the guy. I've met Toby Gerhardt. He's the same height as I am. Sure, he doesn't have a neck, but he's pretty much the same guy I am. So to be an NFL running back, I'm not sure I'd tie my wagon to him. Now, granted, Alex didn't pay much for him, but he also didn't go out and draft another big-time running back to accompany Marshawn Lynch, So I think a lot is riding on Toby Gerhardt and his success in Jacksonville for the Crapstone Prairie Dogs.
Yeah, I mean, he was another guy ahead of my list. I mean, without, if Toby does not produce especially in that Jacksonville offense, Dunn's next running back would be Sir Danny Woodhead out of San Diego or Carlos Hyde, if Gore goes down or they start splitting carries. So, I mean, that's, especially given his aging wide receiver core that he picked up this year, he really needs his running backs to, be the Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch he's had of years past to make up for that potential lack of production from his wide receivers. Another player we got, or at least I have, is T.Y. Hilton from my squad. He, with Reggie Wayne out the last, was 7-8 games of last year, he really turned it on, but he's a very Deshaun Jackson-esque player where it'll be, 25-point games and then 3-point games. So I feel like if he, rises to the top and becomes a more consistent player, that'll be a huge bonus for my team. And I feel like given my depth at wide receiver and all the backups I have for my current running backs, I feel like, if he stays healthy and produces like he can, he will be a make or break player for myself.
All right, should we tackle into our 3 favorite teams and our 3 least favorite teams?
Might as well.
Are you ready for it? I'll let you lead this one.
All right, we'll go number 1 just based off of the production they've had last season and production of players they have on the team from years past. I'll go the Tin Whiskers. Peyton Manning, Alshon Jeffrey, Jordy Nelson, huge point producers. If Arian is anything like he used to be, which was an absolute stud, his team could be a monster. He's got Emmanuel Sanders taking over for that wide receiver 3 or 4 spot in Denver for Decker. That could be huge for him just based on Manning's production. He'll have that wide receiver, quarterback connection right there. And I know Mike thinks huge of Marcus Wheaton out of Pittsburgh, so he's very optimistic about what he's got there.
All right, my number 1 favorite team after the draft and the first week or so of trades that have gone on, it's the Hollywood Hotties for me. I love Lacey, Stacy. I said their name like 500 fucking times last year when I was doing these under the foreskins. I think they did the right thing going out and spending the big bucks on Demarius to get a nice wide receiver. Percy is a make or break guy, but I think Seattle will surprise us with how they're going to use him. And down on the bench, he's got guys like Jeremy Hill. He's got Andrew Hawkins, who could be a little bit of a surprise player. I think Jordan Reed's going to have a nice year. And I think Russell Wilson, for $7 is more than a sufficient fantasy quarterback. If you're not going to get Breeze, Rodgers, Manning, I don't know that there's that big of a gap between, guys like I got, Andrew Luck, and a guy like Russell Wilson. So we'll see how that goes for him this year, but I like the Hotties a lot as my favorite to at least finish number 1 in the league during the regular season. Playoffs are a crapshoot.
All right, one more for now at least. I will go Sioux City Smugglers. Keeping AJ Green, Giovanni Bernard, that's huge. Those guys are big playmakers. Michael Floyd emerging apparently as the number 1 wide receiver in Arizona. We got RG3, who we have seen in the past can be a top 5 quarterback pretty easy if he gets his legs back under him. Jordan Cameron, that quarterback situation is pretty dicey, but he produced last year with freaking Kyle Putton throwing the ball. Hey. So he can do it with Hoyer or Manziel tossing it to him. On his bench, he's got, up-and-comers. He's got Ebron out of Detroit, tight end. Kelvin Benjamin, Carolina wide receiver. Terrence West, supposedly overtaking Ben Tate in Cleveland. If those guys produce, if they become the players, Roger obviously thinks they can become, he could be a team to be reckoned with.
All right, my second breakout team this year is actually going to be the team, the guy sitting across from me. I really like what he did in the draft. Poughkeepsie Pandas. I think Doug Martin and CJ Spiller have bounce-back years. Obviously they hit the floor last year with Martin going down and Spiller struggling through that ankle sprain all year. But I love grabbing Calvin and I love Tony Romo. And I think he's got enough breakout guys that there's a really good chance that one of them hits. Between Cecil Shorts, Evans, Brandon Cooks, 3 good wide receivers. Andre Williams, I think, could be a sufficient player for him. I hope he's not because I have Rashad Jennings, but he very well could be. I think he's covered his bases a lot better this year, so if somebody does go down, which might actually be the best thing for him, if a guy like Spiller goes down and he can pump out Bryce Brown or Fred Jackson every week, it might be the best thing for him. I just like what the Pandas did at the draft. I think they did the right thing. Arizona defense, I think, is a solid defense. As much as I hate to even talk about them because defenses suck and it's such a crapshoot. But nice draft for the Poughkeepsie Pandas. Let's move on to the teams we think are going to suck.
Well, no surprise here, gentlemen. I'll start off with the Trouser Snakes. Granted they got Breeze and Jamal Charles, but having Mike Wallace as your number 2 wide receiver, Sproles as your flex and Pitta as your tight end, I am just not that high on him. On the bench, he's got to pray for injuries for some of his guys to get some playing time and produce for his squad. I mean, who knows about Gore this year? All this stuff going on between him and Carlos Hyde. How Hyde's been looking like a bear in preseason, and Gore's old.
He's old, but they said that last year.
I mean, maybe he's Fred Jackson incarnate. Granted, running the no kicker, no defense set, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out point-wise each week.
I have to believe the Trouser Snakes, A, will pick up a defense and a kicker, and B, will probably trade for a completely different team by the time week 1 hits. The team I like the least, and it kills me to say it because I just absolutely love this guy. It's the Buffalo Armadillos. The Buffalo Armadillos, I think they have some nice pieces in place, and they have some potential. I've never been a big rookie running back guy. They got Sankey in there. I don't know why I'm nervous about LeGarrette Blount being in Pittsburgh, but I'm a little nervous about LeGarrette Blount being in Pittsburgh and taking some of those much-needed points from Le'Veon Bell. Wes Welker's one fucking dinger away from being out, maybe in a wheelchair, doing the Muhammad Ali shuffle the rest of his life. Gotta like Julius Thomas and Julio Jones. You gotta think they're slated for good season. And Kaepernick, I don't know. They still haven't unleashed him. I'm waiting for him to unleash him, and it just hasn't happened since that first season. So for me, the Buffalo Armadillos are at the bottom. It hurts me to say it because I love that armadillo and that goofy looking penis, but it just I see them at the bottom this year.
All right, and at least my second squad or our third squad, I'm gonna go with the Alaska Pipeliners. You got Rodgers, that's great, but your number one wide receiver is Keenan Allen, running back Andre Ellington. After that, you're going Julian Edelman, Chris Ivory. I mean, you need every single person you picked up that's a breakout player to break out. Otherwise, this team will be draft dodger bad.
Wow, that hurts. I like the Dodgers this year, so I'm not going to bag on them.
In previous years.
In previous year, I see what you're saying. Okay. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up. We gave a couple breakout candidates, a couple breakdown candidates. I think it was a nice synopsis of what we saw in the draft this year. Sure, there's many disagreements. Probably people with some red faces right now, a little angry. But hey, we're just doing our jobs here. With that, follow us on Twitter at SJUandMisfits, on YouTube, youtube.com/SJUandMisfits. Good luck out there on the gridiron next week, and I'm going to find a new closing line. Take care, everybody.